Before you enter another best ball contest, you need to watch this video. That's because choosing the right best ball contest is just as important as the players you draft. Today, we're going to break down how we choose which tournaments we play and give you some tips on how to adjust your strategies based on those contests. I'm Adam Levitan of Establish the Run, and today I'm joined by Mike Leone to discuss 4 topics related to best ball contest selection: field size, ADP/quality of competition, payout structure, and user experience. All right, Mike, field size. I think my expectation, my EV is actually highest in the really large best ball tournaments. Things like Underdog, Best Ball Mania, DraftKings Millionaire. Those have the most casual drafters. They have people falling asleep in the middle of drafts. They have people auto picking. However, those are not the tournaments I prefer to play, the extra large field ones, because I like to give myself a realistic chance at realizing that expectation. I can play perfectly from both a micro, player take perspective and a macro strategy/roster construction perspective, and still not even close when the field is that big. 1.2 million entries in the DraftKings Millionaire in 2023, more than 600,000 entries on Underdog. So I want to be rewarded when I play really well. I think the smaller field sizes accentuate that. Leone, how do you think about field size when picking a best ball contest to play?
Yeah, I mean, you said it well. Your expected value might be super high in these really large field tournaments, but your odds of realizing your true expected value are going to take, a lifetime to achieve, and maybe not even then. So I do still like to kind of find the middle ground where some of these mid-stakes, larger field tournaments are where I like to be, where you get some of the softness of a large field tournament, but a little bit more realistic chance than some of the really low stakes, mega big field tournament. So that's generally where I am at, in the middle. But it's what experience you're looking for, and I'll play a little bit of everything. So you don't have to pick exactly one to do, but yeah, ultimately you got to pick the experience that's best for yourself.
And look, we're not going to win 5 million. We're not going to win 3 million playing contests with a field size of 1,000 to 10,000 people. I'm okay with that. I am not greedy. I will win my 50K or 100K or 200K and play for that prize. And I think more importantly, my edges are accentuated in small field. Small field stuff is less about stacking and week 17 correlation and all kinds of different game theory edges. It's more, the smaller the field, the more is about roster construction and just being on the right players. And I think those are my biggest edges. So not only am I more likely to realize my edge in smaller field tournaments, but I also think that it accentuates my strengths. So
yeah, and for myself, I kind of like the slightly larger field where some of those elements with the stacking and how the playoff structures work come into play a bit more, because I think I can balance those things throughout a draft better than the average person that's either maybe overstacking or on the flip side, not taking stacking into account enough. Being able to balance all the elements that go into making a high expected value team. These large field tournaments, it's tougher than it seems on the surface because there's a lot of wrinkles to it. So if you want just like a simpler experience where it's like pick the best plays and the smart roster construction, the smaller field is going to be better for you. If you like thinking through how you can get unique teams into the playoffs and how you can incorporate correlation into your lineup without giving up ADP value and figuring out what time of year to draft and all that stuff, then one of these really large field tournaments might be better for you.
Okay. Second thing to consider is the quality of competition on the site. And a lot of that flows through to what the average draft position, aka ADP, is on the site. Now, first, let me say, I know a lot of people out there care about how a site looks, how the draft room feels. Is it convenient? Is the draft mobile app good? It would be impossible for me to care less about that stuff. And maybe I'm a hardo, but I play for money and that's it. So for example, last year in 2022 on DraftKings, you could not upload rankings to the site. It created a situation where everyone was drafting blind off some really bad ADP and really bad default ranks, even at high stakes. And that's a massive, massive edge, something I seek out. I put in the work to manually input rankings myself, and ended out with a 50K win in the 333 best ball in 2022. So I think the smaller the site, the less coverage around it, the worse the tech/app is. That's where I want to be. It's just likely those are the better games. Everyone playing on Underdog is pretty good. The ADP is so strong. People are stacking and thinking about roster construction the right way. The edges are in the really small things. Whereas on the weaker sites, the edges in simply getting players I like literal rounds later than I would get them on tougher sites. So to me, Leone, I'm going around, I'm looking who has the ADP I disagree with most. And typically that's going to be on the sites that have a worse user experience. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect you to be the one with the absolute no sex take here, but that's the case. You also want to think about ADP in the sense of roster construction and how you build. So, Underdog generally pushes up wide receivers up the board a lot earlier than other drafts. And you might like the way your teams fit that way. I know for me, sometimes I like leagues on FFPC where I can draft a couple running backs early and still be super strong and beat people at wide receiver because the wide receivers go later there. So I like to draft there because of that fits my preferred roster construction. I know on Underdog, if I try and do that, I can get in trouble. So it's not just the sharpness of the ADP, but also the types of rosters that you like to draft.
Third thing I think is important to consider is something we talk about in DFS all the time, and that is the payout structure and the rake. In other words, how much is the site removing from the prize pool as their fee? Ideally, when it comes to payout structure, it is flat. And that's because there's so much variance when you get into the top 0.1, top 0.25% of tournaments. You want it to be flat because there's so much luck at the top. So I look for tournaments where first is no more than 20 to 25% of the total prize pool, and 10th is 10% of that first place prize. Leone, is that too nitty? Or should we be going for $1 million to first and $10 to second type of prize pools?
I don't think it's too nitty. I prefer the flatter payout structure as well. But again, you're tying up your money for 6 months or whatever. So it's kind of what type of sweat do you want? Do you want better odds of winning some money, or do you want to take that swing at winning life-changing money? But the other thing to consider is how the playoffs are structured, not just how the payout structure works, but some of these tournaments you get to the playoff, which is usually week 15, you might only advance if you're first out of like 16 teams. There's other tournaments out there where you might advance if you're top 3 out of 8 people in your team. And that totally changes the experience you have. That's where you mentioned earlier, liking smaller field stuff. You're more likely to just have a strong quality team, just advance to the finals and actually eke out a sweat if you're willing to take on, a little bit less upside in terms of the pure financial value up in the grand prize spot.
I love those 12-person starting leagues, and then it goes to a 6-person in the quarterfinals, 6-person in the semifinals, and then something around 8 to 10-person final. I mean, you don't need to be doing any week 17 correlation or crazy stacking stuff to win in that format. The second thing I would say was about rake. So typically when it comes to rake, the higher the stakes, the lower the rake. For example, on DraftKings, the $44 buy-in has a 12.3% rake. The 250 only has a 7.4% rake. That is a massive, massive difference in your expectation. I think it is worth taking the time for everyone to calculate the rake on the contest you're playing by simply comparing the total payout versus the total amount that the site will collect. I try not to play stuff that's over 10% rake. If it's soft enough, I think you can, but I try to limit it to that 10% rake number. Any more thoughts on rake here, Leone?
Yeah, just make sure you're taking into account the strength of the field you're playing against, which can offset some of the rake you're playing, because some of those super high stakes contests you're playing against people that aren't making mistakes, and it can be tougher to beat the rake even though the rake is lower.
The fourth and final thing I think you should consider when registering for a best ball contest is the user experience. And this can mean all kinds of things. It can mean how well the draft room looks on mobile. It can mean how fast the games fill. It can be how easy it is to upload your rankings or to maneuver around your rankings, to fill out your queue, to see what you have, to see what you need. Underdog is far and away the best for this. If you want to do a lot of drafts at once, if you want to get slows off, if you want to get fasts off, if you want the cleanest UX, if that's something that you value, Underdog is certainly the best for that. The problem on other sites, some other sites right now, is if it's high stakes, especially, you could sit around and the contests don't fill. So you're just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. Contest does not fill. Leone, any comments on user experience and what you look for?
Yeah, I look for this, I think, more than you do, because I care about this, spending a lot of time doing these drafts. I want to enjoy it. And especially if you're doing slow drafts, there's pros and cons to different sites. DraftKings is going to be tougher for the field, and it's an advantage, but it's also going to be tougher for yourself. They don't pause the slow draft clock overnight, which FFPC and Underdog do. So, you got an 8-hour window to make your picks. That could be stressful. You also, have sites like Underdog, where if you upload your rankings, it automatically changes the rankings in the draft that you're in, whereas DraftKings does not, which is an advantage if you've got a lot of slow drafts going on and you want to keep track of some big rankings changes for Underdog. I will say what's nice about DraftKings is you can toggle between ADP and ETR ranking. If you upload R ranks really easily, you can look at both at the same time. And that's an advantage, because those are the two things we preach. Like, you want to get a ton of ADP value, but you also want to take advantage of the player takes that ETR is driving. So that allows you to do both a little bit easier than you can on other sites.
One thing I think that is important for best ball is that people should be using it, especially low stakes stuff, to practice for their season long league. And there's so many different ways you can practice for your season long league. I think playing low stakes best ball is the best one. I would just encourage people to play a format that replicates what their season long, what their home league draft will look like. It is unlikely to look like some of these mega large field low stakes stuff. Something in the mid stakes, something smaller field, I think is a better practice for your best ball. And something like that's regular season only, I think is better practice too. There are sites out there such as Drafters that does regular season only, no playoffs, and you start to eliminate some of all the strategy stuff that comes in when all the payouts are in week 17. You try to draft the best team for an entire season. That's more likely to be what your home league draft will look like. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more fantasy football and best ball content.